welcome our listeners today to our episode of the podcast with Nicolás Ferreira from our associate in Uruguay, Posadas Vecino, and our Latin American Cannabis Practice Group co-chair, Monica Bonnett from Posse Herrera Ruiz in Colombia. Welcome, Nicolás. Welcome, Monica.
Hi, Mario. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mario. Good afternoon, Monica. Luckily back at the
Nicolás.
office.
Yes, back in the office, one day at a time, but we're getting there.
Yes.
And Nicolás, let's jump right in. So we know Uruguay was one of the first, if not the first country to legalize adult use cannabis, or recreational use as it's sometimes known. Your country made the big jump. Tell us what things look like today.
Someone got to be first, no? Yes, for us, it's a very interesting subject. I took an idea from the Global Cannabis report in 2019 that says that Uruguay was the first country in the world to legalize cannabis, but had a slow market development. And that idea is and that marks the current situation. And yes, as you were saying, Uruguay was the first country in the world to regulate the production of cannabis for adult, recreational, medical, and industrial use. And we did it so through the law 19,172, the Uruguayan Cannabis Act, approved in December 2013. The Cannabis Act also created the Institute for Regulation and Control of Cannabis, the IRCA, and we are going to mention it in other question shortly. But that is the institute responsible for implementing the regulation and the control related to the plant. Our legislation approved similar decisions to as other countries, but Uruguay was the first to establish a regulatory framework for all the plant functionalities. This first, we're the first country approved a complete legal framework, and that was a big difference and make us a pioneer in the subject somehow in 2013. We also have another regulatory important fact, that is the regulation approved in February 2015 with a regulatory decree for 56-105 that regulate the medical use and the scientific research that was passed. Is a decree that ratifies the state, and the IRCA will promote the research and the knowledge production of scientific evidence regarding psychoactive and non-psychoactive cannabis. And this is an important concept for the Uruguayan regulation, because in our regulation, psychoactive cannabis means the flowering tops of cannabis whose content of natural THC is equal or over 1% in volume of the plant. So this is a relevant information to the license requirements of each case, and it's an important concept for us. In our legislation, in our process of legalization, the IRCA is an institute designated with a special emphasis, we could say, on cooperation across a variety of other state entities with responsibilities relevant to cannabis regulation. For that reason, IRCA also, in the organization of IRCA, of that institute, we have also included representative of Minister of Public Health, Minister of Social Development, and Livestock, Agriculture, and Fishing. But I think that here is one of the issues of the regulation, because the governmental interaction that was generated delays in the cannabis development. As some key players of the industry has pointed out in the past, and for sure this represents one of the most important improvements opportunities that we had in the regulation, and in order to make it more flexible in the future. But thinking in the main points of the legalization process in Uruguay, it's important to refer to the adult recreational regulation that Uruguay cannabis law established. That was maybe the most famous regulation, or the point of the regulation that was more had more attention from the exterior, from the international regulators. That our law established 3 different methods of access to cannabis in general. We're talking about the home growth, that adults can grow up to 6 female plants per household for the personal use. They have to be registered with authorities. As today, we can talk about that 12,000 Uruguayans had registered as home growers. This is a very important number, I think, for a population like Uruguayan people. We also have the cannabis clubs that adults can join cooperatives to grow cannabis together. This cannabis club must first be registered with the IRCA and must have between 15 and 14 members. It's like a collective way of access to cannabis for recreational use, for adult use. The clubs are limited to 99 plants in the same space, and they are controlled by the authorities. Actually, we have, as today, April numbers, 170 clubs across the country. This is a very important number, also for the population of the country. And finally, yes, Mike.
Just curious, did the club refer to a physical location site or the group of people? And I guess my question relates to, where do the cannabis clubs actually cultivate their cannabis? Do they rent a space? Or do they, yes, as part of their application, they have a location that is submitted as the cultivation site? How do these work? Because this is a new concept for me.
Yes, they had a special place that in the registration before the IRCA, in that process, they have the same space. They have to be very precise of the condition of the space, the condition of the members. You have the personal statute from the members. So this is a quite regulated way of cannabis together, a group of users in a special place, duly registered. Yes, before the IRCA, with all the anonymous data for the public, but before the IRCA, you have all that information duly registered.
I have another question about the clubs. Do they need a permit from the government, and do they have the duty to provide information about their activities of cultivation and consume before the authority?
Yes, the cannabis clubs are quite regulated by the IRCA. The institute is responsible to control the primary inscription, but also all the activities later on from the club. They have to control the numbers of plants that they have, the numbers of members. They must control that they cannot dispense more than 480 grams of the drug to each of their members per day. So this is quite regulated. The production of the club. So this is quite regulated inside the IRCA as the institute that must control the functionality of the cannabis club. Yes.
And sorry, Nicolás, we cut you off. You said that there was another method.
No. Yes, the other method of access to the cannabis as we can say the recreational use of cannabis is the commercial purchase. That maybe is the most famous on the cover story of the regulation of Uruguay. that state that individuals can purchase up to 10 grams per week of cannabis at determined sales point. And the law specifies that that sales point could be the pharmacies. Actually, that today is the way that individuals can purchase the cannabis is in the pharmacies, and also growers can be licensed by the state to produce cannabis for commercial purchase. It's the state that contracts the growers that to provide this commercial purchase objective. Actually, we have 5 companies that have been licensed to produce commercial cannabis, and more than 45,000, I think, as today, more or less, Uruguayans registered as purchases, because you have companies that could produce the cannabis, determined sales point that there are pharmacies duly registered with control of security and regulation to provide the cannabis, and you have the purchaser duly registered as an anonymous way, but registered and with the fingerprint the access to the cannabis. This, I think, is the 3 methods that in the recreational adult consumption of cannabis that are duly approved by the law. But additional to the methods of access of cannabis, it's important to talk about, I think, about the industrialization of cannabis and the medicinal use of cannabis and other uses different from the adult recreational use. And we think that the important main point here is that the cannabis regulation also establishes that the elaboration of vegetables and pharmaceutical specialties must be authorized. So this is in the way of the complete regulation of the law. We have also contemplated the plant, the extract, and the production in all the production of the cannabis. And we think that while the government has made important advances in implemented non-medical cannabis access, like the distribution in pharmacies, the medical cannabis was a bit of struggle to overcome some obstacles, especially with the exportation of the medical cannabis. As an example, we talk that in 2015, we had a decree that creates the frameworks for medical cannabis on paper. But in the reality, for the Uruguayans, have been quite difficult to access formally to products of medical cannabis. It was not until December 2017 that a medical cannabis product became able for purchase formally in pharmacies. So the advance in that way was quite slow as we expected. Actually, also the registering of a new medicine take a series of requirements that guarantee safety with maximum levels of evidence, that with important delays in the process. And this decree also imposes a prior authorization of the Minister of Public Health at the time of export medical cannabis. So these issues, these were the principal complements that the industry has voiced in the past. And I think that the obstacles to export of the product was one of the problems in our legislation. Also, I think that maybe to close an idea of the evolution of the legislation, we can say that Uruguay had the temporary advantage of being the first to regulate the cannabis, but it was also victim of that timing because at the early stages of the law, no one was thinking about the industry at an international level, or no one thought of creating a legal framework for an export industry. And the focus was public safety and health, actually. And this was relevant point for the industry that needs an improvement, and was from the industry was some obstacles in the process. The relevant delays occur, and I think that this make a necessary reconcile the registration and the efficiency requirement of the country of destination without our country regulation. I think that this took a while to understand the problem. As every framework, legal framework, you had time to think in the problems, to adjust the system. And in order to resolve this matter, in 2020, there were issued two decrees, the 215 and 214 decree that deal with the export of medical cannabis and industrial hemp in a more flexible way. These decrees refer to a specific harvest, but give a reference of how it could be regulated in general for in the future. But I think that although these issues for the industry, for the exportation principally, the activity of companies linked to cannabis is increasing and actually multiplying the associated services in the country. It is estimated that more than 100 companies in the sector, some of these companies with more than 5 years developing genetics, cultivation methods, extraction know-how, all this is a value for the industry in the country. In order to get an idea, as of April 2021, there were 44 non-psychoactive cannabis cultivation duly authorized in Uruguay, 11 licenses for psychoactive cannabis, 6 for cannabis for medical use, and 5 for recreational use, 20 licenses for industrialization, and 22 for research and development. The authorization process requires several controls, and this is a specific study of each project, but I think that these numbers are important for a country like Uruguay, and in order to continue growing as an industry. I think that
it sounds from what you're saying, Nicolás, that you have several established cannabis clubs, several established companies, and registered purchasers as individuals. So it seems like it's an industry that's while continuing to grow is already, if I'm not mistaken,
in function. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's quite interesting. And Nicolás, which will move me to my second question. You mentioned a little bit. You said initially that the legislation or the legalization or regulation of cannabis in Uruguay came as a sort of safety and security, that was what propelled it to the forefront. Can you elaborate a little bit on where the legalization came from, and if that was the focus, if that was the sole focus?
Yes, actually, as a pioneer in the world in the matter, it's interesting asking ourselves why we go for this regulation. I think how we arrive at this legislation, this pioneer regulation, there are different theories of that, but we must start acknowledging that political will and the social mobilization both contributed to the success of the cannabis regulation in Uruguay. Because in one hand, the political environment played a central role, putting comprehensive cannabis reform on the agenda. On the other hand, activists keep the issue on the political agenda and influenced the content of the cannabis reform and regulation as now. I think that for that reason, both political will and social mobilization were necessary for the start, were necessary for the continuation and the success conclusion of cannabis reform in our country. I think, as we're talking first, originally the government announced a plan for regulate and control legalization. Initially to combat crime and argue that the model of fight against drug trafficking force in the world has failed. This was some political interpretation, argue, I think, in first place for the president in that moment, Jose Mujica. I think that in that point of goals for the legalization, from the reform, the law, I think that we can comment that the goal of the law was to reduce the drug trafficking related violence by taking cannabis off the black market in the way that the consumption of adults were in a regulated market, not in black market. Promote public health through education, through prevention campaigns. And actually, I think the elimination of an existing legal paradox that allowed the possession but effectively block users from accessing cannabis. In order to go forward a coherent regulation, I think this was one of the goals of the law in Uruguay. But I think that along with the regulation of cannabis, Uruguay also became the first South American country to authorize the cultivation of hemp for industrial use. And this was an idea of the industrialization of the cannabis. I think, in conclusion, we can mention that the focus was on public safety and health, and not initially in the industry and another potential interest with cannabis. That focus, I think, appears in the following stages of the regulation. I think this is a possible conclusion of the norm.
An interesting evolution, which leads to our last question. And you've mentioned a little bit along the way. So you have legalization in 2013, some additional laws. I think you mentioned 2015 and 17 and 2020. So what do you expect, or what recent changes or what upcoming changes do you see in the short-term future and potentially in the long-term future in relation to the industry in Uruguay?
Okay, I think that it's very difficult to anticipate changes in a market as dynamic as the cannabis industry. But I think, as you said, the evolution, that the time travel with our legal framework, almost a decade of our regulatory evolution, entails relevant changes in the system, and I think in a short term. The government and the industry knows that, and I think, like any administrative model, there is a room for improvement, and future changes are anticipated. I think one important development for the future will be, I think for sure, the development of products derived from cannabis, edibles, beverage, medicine, and also in genetics. I think the experience of the industry in our country during the past years will be crucial in this matter. And within those expected modifications, last month the Uruguayan government announced the intention to legalize edibles, non-psychoactive cannabis, CBD products, and we are thinking about changes to the current regulation that would allow to take the CBD as an ingredient, taking a huge regulatory step forward, so to accelerate the development of the production and the commercialization of edibles and beverage. And I think this not only will put Uruguay forward as the first country in Latin America to be considered the legalization of edibles cannabis products, and also will stimulate the country's cannabis industry.
Yes. Is it that the regulation contemplates the authorization of finished products with cannabis derivatives within it, but is it also to export those products, or that's just for domestic sale?
Yes, we're talking about that the current regulation that would allow the changes of the current regulation will allow the production of edibles both for domestic and the international sales, and this will be something very important for the industry. The idea is to include in the national bromatologic regulation the use of CBD without psychoactive substances, in order that the cannabis could be an ingredient to a final product. So this will be something very important for the industry, and in order to export, more important whatsoever. I think another, in order to be more precise, I think another change that the authorities has been talking about is contemplate the idea of include participation of the local institutes of health insurance, facilitating access to cannabis medicine to the patients who require it, and also to collaborate with their health professionals. I think this will improve the local medical cannabis industry and do better to the public in general to access medicinal cannabis. And finally, I think that we can talk about something that locally and internationally is a big issue for the industry, that is the access to banking. The Uruguayan government understand the need for cannabis-related businesses to have access to banking, and actually, as today, forces outside Uruguay, principally compliance situation of the financial institutions in the US, have prevented such access, and the government is working on a solution to the problem. Maybe this could be an international solution. This would be the easiest way. Or maybe take some of the Canadian experience as a reference with a particular protocols between banks that allow center operation for cannabis. I don't know. This is an issue that requires an immediate solution, and we know that the government are working on that. And finally, we can talk about something like a necessary update of the regulation, and the government in that way is working. That I think we could expect shortly changes in the regulatory framework, especially something that we say early on, the modification of the legal framework to facilitate and simplify the exportation. That's something similar to the 2020 decrease, but in general as a change of the regulatory framework. Changes to specify definitions to eliminate ambiguities in the actual regulation, improvement to the regulation actually, and finally to establish clearly the scope of each organism that participates in the context of cannabis, to improve the system and the timing from the registration, from the exportation, and all the situation that is going on with the industry in general. I think this is the changes that have been announced, changes that will be of an enormous importance, repositioning our country once again in the cannabis industry, I think.
Well, thank you very much, Nicolás. It's really important to see the road that Uruguay has traveled since it legalized cannabis, and we can really see many things that we've seen in other jurisdictions, and some that are unique. So greater patient access is something that's important. Also creating a bit of an export market, and at the same time struggles that everybody is dealing with in the industry with banking, and access to capital, access to credit as well, which go hand in hand. So these are really important things, and I think it's really great of you to share your time and share your expertise with us. and our listeners. So I'd like to thank you again, and thanks, Monica, as always, for joining us. And Nicolás, we really hope to chat with you soon, maybe by end of year, and you can let us know how things are going.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Monica. This was a pleasure. I know this was a high level of concept, of view of concept, but it's a fascinating topic, quite dynamic topic, and for sure we have more to talk about in the future.
Thank you very much, Nicolás. Thank you very much, Mario.
Thank you.